I would now like to kick off our first plenary session, the first of 50, actually, in 3 days. This morning, please join me in welcoming all of our panelists here for the first session with our expert moderator for the Arctic Encounter, senior news anchor for the Washington Post, Libby Casey. Can Libby and our speakers please join the stage? Thank you.
Yes, okay. I'm Libby Casey, and it is truly an honor to be on this stage with these panelists today. We're running a little behind, but we'll bleed over a little bit into the next session so we get some time with all of you, but we won't cut things too short for the next round either. I just want to share with all of you, especially since this is our first session this morning, that there is a way that you can ask our guests questions throughout this week. Take out your cell phones. Usually you're told to turn them off. In this case, keep them on because we'll use the guidebook app throughout this week to have you ask questions of our panelists. To ask a question, simply open up the app. Using the sidebar, navigate to main room Q&A. From the tabs at the top, choose Q&A, and then type your question and press ask to submit it, and that will be shared with me, and I can share it with our panelists. Here's a way to go faster. Go to the back of your booklet. There's a QR code. You can scan that into your phone, and you can access it that way as well. I want to start out with the Alaskans on this stage. We're very fortunate to have different perspectives here to kick this off, and I think it's so symbolic of this conference that this is the first session. I want to start with the Alaskans to get your sense of how the process is going with this really unprecedented federal spending opportunity that communities across America have right now. The bipartisan infrastructure bill, the Inflation Reduction Act, and it was almost a year ago now that I know Senator Murkowski held an event right here to try to help people understand this process of how you get involved in bringing some of that money home to communities. So Thomas, Matt, could you give us your initial perspective on how that process is going and how Alaskan communities are able to take advantage of this?
I
think it's right here.
Test. Thank you, Libby. Glad to do so. I guess. Yes. What I do understand about the infrastructure bill, it's $110 billion to be spent over the next 5 years. And, that's nationwide. And so some of it is being doled out, I know, especially in the field of connectivity, which is very important for the local communities in Alaska, especially the remote ones, to be connected. So I know some of it's going to good use for that. But there's a lot of interest in Alaska, but a lot of it is driven south of, by perspectives south of the Arctic. So I challenge the decision makers, the policy makers, to really engage at the local level. Find out, what are the actual needs of the communities in the Arctic, and take the perspective from the local communities and incorporate them into your decision-making process. Because, it is a large amount of money. There's a lack of infrastructure in Alaska. But then again, like I said, there's a lot of interest in investing, but there's this perspective and perception from south of the Arctic that skews where the money goes. So I really encourage the decision makers, the policy makers here in Alaska to engage with the business community who you represent and find out what the actual needs are of the local communities and take that into consideration when you do make the decision on where the funding goes. So it's quite important.
Dr. Pearl Brower, can you talk about what you hope to see through this process and how the communication lines are working as the money is allocated?
Absolutely. Libby, thank you. Just to add on to what Thomas is saying, I think it's very true that so often when our state gets resources, the greater population, of course, is in the South. And so when resources are allocated, most of that time, those monies go elsewhere outside of the Arctic or any rural Alaskan communities. So I think it's really important for decision makers and those who are at the table to make sure to engage those of us in the Arctic at that table. It's so critical that you have individuals who are in the communities be a part of the decision-making process. I think it's really important that so often we do have consultations and we have meetings, but my real question is, are folks really listening, and are they really hearing and taking what is being said in those communities? Because those are the people who are living it every day and needing it. I would hope, when I think about our community, of course, the most northern community in the United States Arctic, we need roads, we need housing development. We need definitely those infrastructure investments that truly will continue to keep giving many, many years down the line.
Gail Schubert, can you talk about what the future could look like in 10, 20 years and what some of the big challenges are and also the opportunities?
Thank you. I think for a really long time, Congress, when it looked at appropriating funds, looked at the population base. And so it was really difficult for Alaska to get the kind of funding for the infrastructure needed for our communities. Our communities might be isolated somewhat with, no road system, but, they're still really important and strategically located communities in the Bering Strait region. I was really heartened by the fact that Congress finally funded the Nome port that will be coming in. There was some concern about the match that Nome would have come up with, but that has pretty much been taken care of. And I really think that our communities, given the fact that we are really coastal and really strategically located, need to have more infrastructure built in those communities, and it should not be based on population. It should be based on the fact that we are in really strategic locations and that we deserve to have the kinds of infrastructure in the communities that, in the lower 48, for example.
Gail, can I just follow up with you? What is the conversation like right now in terms of the strategic and security aspect of where Alaskan communities are located, and how are the needs of the local populations being taken into account? Because it can really turn some heads when you talk about security and how close we are to Russia, among others. But what about the needs of the people?
I think that, we, the people of the Bering Strait region, really have experienced a lot of changes in the past, 50 years, and particularly, when you look at ANCSA and the fact that, once ANCSA passed and the village and regional corporations were created, I think that folks expected that there would be some sort of economic boom or development or growth from that, and it did help in terms of the fact that we were recognized as corporate and village and tribal entities, and we had the opportunity and the power to speak out on our own behalf. I think that when you look at, and all of you must know about the folks that, or the men that escaped from Russia, Siberia essentially, and made their way to Savunga. That shows a real desperation, I think, for them to have taken their own lives in their hands to come to America for a better opportunity. And I think that we should have that same enthusiasm for Arctic America and the fact that we have lots to offer. And there is a lot going on in the Arctic that I think our Congress and America should recognize that we are at a very strategic location.
Chief Bill Erasmus, welcome to Alaska. Can you talk with us about the interconnectedness that you're feeling right now, your communities, and what else happens in Canada in terms of everything from development to the environment to funding?
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank the local people for inviting us into their territory. It's really a pleasure to be here. The first time I was in Alaska was many years ago with the Arctic Winter Games. And thank you to the drummers and the performers. That was really important to see this morning. I'm from, I guess, just east. I'm on the other side of the mountains. There's Yukon, and then I'm in the Northwest Territories. Our area is somewhat different, but beautiful as it is here. We have some huge challenges as being people in the north, as other people here. Similarly, we always thought that because we're so far north, we really wouldn't be affected by what happens in the rest of the world. But the reality is, in our situation, the water drains north. So the system, the water basin, it's called the McKenzie Water Basin, it flows north, and so everything that happens in the south affects us. And in our area, in Alberta, there are tar sands development, which have been going on since the 1960s. And we just found out a couple of weeks ago now that there are tailings pond wastage water that are leaking downstream, and they have been leaking for almost a year. So these chemicals include arsenic, because when you develop oil, you mine what is called bitumen. In order to dilute that, you need 3 to 4 barrels of water to get 1 barrel of oil. So a lot of water is used. They're put into tailings ponds, which are now lakes because this has been going on for so long. They're coming down the river system, not just with Indigenous or Native people, but with everyone. This is affecting everyone, and it goes all the way down the water system over 1,000 miles into the Arctic Ocean, which then affects everyone here sitting up here. It affects Prudhoe Bay, Russia, Norway, Sweden, Greenland, and so on. So we have to learn how to, if we're talking about development, how do we take care of the people first? Big issue with us.
Is that conversation happening?
It's happening, but it should have happened in the 60s.
Ms. Madeline Redfern, welcome to you as well. Thank you. What are the barriers that you see right now, whether they are governmental, economic, or social, to making sure your community can thrive?
There's a lot of similarities, without a doubt, for our northern regions, no matter whether it is here in Alaska, northern Canada, Greenland, Iceland, and the Nordic countries, their northern regions, where the decision makers generally are based in the southern part of their countries, and a big disconnect with respect to understanding our realities, and yet that's often where the national policies and the national programs, as well as the funding, sort of gets developed. So the more that we can actually get those elected officials and those senior bureaucrats to our region, the better. There are similar large announcements in Canada regarding infrastructure, whether that's in energy to reach net zero by 2050, in telecommunications, another $2 billion, which is a national program, to get our citizens to have 50-10, so 50 megabits download, 10 megabits upload. And for anyone in this room, I mean, that's sort of that's a goal of yesterday. And most of our people do live about 100 miles from the US border, and they do enjoy good connectivity. And yet, that statement alone will say that, well, except for, that's the target goal for 90% of Canadians. And when I read that, I knew exactly which 10% weren't going to get even 50-10. That's us in the north. And recently, the Auditor General of Canada, even this week, sort of chastised our federal government for not rolling out those funds in a timely manner. Almost 1.5 billion in the last sort of few years wasn't spent. And what we need to do is really prioritize that those in the north who do not even enjoy the basic services in the southern regions should actually be prioritized. So we need energy security. In Nunavut, 25 communities are 100% diesel dependent. And I just found out from one of our territorial government officials that they have a very detailed evacuation plan for 10 of our communities when and if our power plant goes down. We had that happen in Pangertung. So, we are literally living in sort of, the red and the critical zone, and there's no excuse for that. We also know with NORAD modernization, there's a tremendous opportunity to see these investments that are not only good for defense, should also be dual purpose and good for our communities and good for our resource sector. So there is this once in a lifetime opportunity with the billions of dollars that are going to be invested, but we need to be engaged. We need to be in the room, we need to be at the table, and we need our Indigenous communities and businesses and development corporations to also be able to get those government contracts and not see those investments being squandered because they've just been done badly. We've got decades of that experience where the original purpose of the investment doesn't even meet the needs of our communities.
And how is that changing? Are you finding that it is advancing?
Yes and no. So Inuit in Canada actually won the NORAD contract. So 7 years, almost $600 million. So that's good. We're pushing hard. There's a motto that we say is nothing about us without us. So we want to be in those rooms. We do know that we have businesses like Arctic AUV in the drone business. We've got Indigenous businesses. One that I'm with, is pushing to build subsea fiber optic into our region. We signed a contract with Quintillion, this week. So we know that we need that inter-northern, Arctic cooperation, and that we do have that interest, we do have that skill set, we do have that ability. And with the government of Canada providing a 5% Indigenous procurement target, we've got to push hard. 5% is probably not enough, especially in our northern regions where, we make up 85% of the population. So, 5% should be much higher than that, but that's a national target. So we have to advocate. We have to prove to them that we are capable and that we need to build our capacity and develop the partnership, sometimes with southern, partners to make it happen. But when we're part of the project, we know that we can do it better because we've seen many past projects be inadequate because we weren't involved and we didn't participate. So it's mixed. Some, areas we're doing better. In other areas, there's a lot of room for improvement.
Thank you. Ms. Gunn-Britt Redder, welcome to Alaska. You shared with me a powerful piece of writing where you observed that your people are, of course, contributing the least to climate change, as many northern communities can relate to, and yet, as we all know, the Arctic and the area below the Arctic is experiencing incredible rates of melt and effects. But you took this to a new place about warning against green colonization and saying that you shouldn't be forced to be the problem solver and the solution giver. Can you explain that?
Yes, thank you, and thank you for welcoming me to Alaska and not discussing the footprint that the flying contributes with. Yes, I recognize a lot of the challenges that was addressed by the co-panelists, and that's about investments in the Arctic. And now what we see is that the Sami communities continues to be the deliverable of resources to the needs created in the south. And of course, we support that we need to get off fossil fuels, and we welcome also more green energy. But what we see now is in the Nordic countries, or the Sami people live, that, for example, wind energy plants, and they are not small and cute like in Denmark, I would say, but these are massive wind turbines that are more than 200 meter tall. Then somebody has to do the transition to the other metric system, and they are hundreds in one field. So this is a massive land destruction as well. And we see in Norway and also in the other countries that a lot of these green transition projects are placed on land that the Sami people use to sustain their culture. And there is an expectation saying that, but this is good, this is green energy, we all need it, we are all in this together, and we all need this. Yes, we do, but should the Sami people carry the largest burden of holding or giving up land to these green investments? So this is something, and talking about capitals, and there are two other points. In Sami language, E means no. And it's even with double I's. So we are known to say E all the time, and blamed for being difficult. But we are trying to protect our future and our culture. And we have a case in Norway. I'll try to do it very, very briefly. But there is a Supreme Court ruling saying that the permission given to a wind energy production plant in the southern Sami lands were given on wrong permissions, and every day this is breaking the human rights of the Sami people. That Supreme Court ruling was more than 500 days ago, and the wind turbines are still running. So there was a youth, Sami youth and environmental youth organizations that went to the capital and entered the ministries, petroleum and energy ministry, and sat down and said, we sit here until you stop the breach of human rights and the windmills. But the demonstration lasted for a week, and they finally got the prime minister to personally apologize to the reindeer husbandry that they were actually breaking, because they didn't admit first it was a breaking of human rights. But their windmills are still producing. But so we are waiting for what this will come up to. Thank you.
Our time is tight, with great regret, but I do want to continue with you, Gunn-Britt, on this. The Arctic Council is on pause, obviously. How are you developing relationships and continuing in this difficult time of the pandemic, which offered opportunities of communication, but also stopped travel, the Arctic Council, and the work that you've been involved with in that sphere? How do you view this Arctic Encounter Symposium as an opportunity? What should we all be talking with you about this week?
Well, you should talk with each other, not but that's also the reason why I chose to come here. The Arctic Encounter has been taking place some years, but I have, between many travels, not prioritized to travel so far. But it's great to be here. But because we have this pause in what we call the usual Arctic cooperation, it's important to come and meet people on these other occasions that is raised. So I have prioritized very high to make it here, to exactly speak with people and get a sense of the needs and the cooperation that we can do.
Chief Erasmus, where do you see opportunities for cooperation and advancement this week?
Same as Gunn-Britt. I haven't been to this forum before, but we took a look at it and agreed that this is an opportunity. And you mentioned the Arctic Council. We're members of the Arctic Council as one of the Indigenous peoples organizations. On the council, we're called permanent participants. I believe all of the states, the 8 states that are part of that body are all here, and we will continue to coordinate and talk to each other. It's a huge concern because Russia is still the chair, And with their invasion in the Ukraine, it's caused a huge setback in many ways. But we have to be creative, and we have to find ways to make things work. So, thank you.
Madeline, where do you see opportunities for coordination and collaboration with, for example, the United States, people here on this stage and in this room?
So thankfully, we're seeing lots of meetings and discussions, whether that is with our own military and our NATO allies. We're seeing meetings happening with the Arctic Economic Council. There's the Arctic Circle. So there's quite a number of different fora that exchanges are happening, usually in their own bubbles. And the challenge and the need is to actually break down some of those silos and start having the conversations, you know, where we have Indigenous peoples and our organizations and development corporations, different levels of government, industry, the academia, because we need to all be working on these issues together, especially now with the huge opportunity for development. We want it to be responsible development. We want it to be good development. We want to be part of that. At the same time, we want to ensure that our northern regions are safe and secure. So again, the defense sector, you know, plays a big role with that, but so do our local, you know, hunters and trappers organizations, our rangers. And there really is a chance to try to make sure that this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity with all these investments is that it truly makes our region safe and prosperous.
I'm so sorry that we're out of time. Dr. Brower, I promised I wouldn't pick on you first, but I'm going to pick on you last. Can you just very briefly talk about how government and business can be more responsive to communities going forward?
Absolutely. Well, maybe I'll just say again, I think it's so critical that the right people are at the right table, or that we've all kind of said, and that we, you know, government and business needs to listen. For too long, as Indigenous people, you know, and really people of the Arctic, so many decisions have been made at tables in which didn't have representation from those people, nor many times decisions are made in which people at the table have not even been to the Arctic themselves. So I think that one thing is we 100% need to make sure these communication lines are open. We need to make sure that Indigenous people of the Arctic are invited to the table when things are being discussed about them. And I think that there really needs to be some commitment on an investment in the Arctic. We are on the forefront of so many different changes, and we have incredible opportunity. So,
Thank you so much. Thank you to all of you. Thank you.